When was the last time you paused, not just physically, but spiritually, and listened to the ache that lives inside you, that ache you've gotten used to, the kind that doesn't scream, but hums in the background of your daily life? It's there in the mornings when you wake up with a sense of dread. It lingers at night when the world is quiet, but your thoughts won't stop spinning. It shows up in the tension in your chest, the silent irritation at people who've done nothing wrong, the numbness you can't explain. Carl Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." What did he mean? He meant that when we refuse to confront real pain, we develop symptoms instead. We suffer in distorted ways through anxiety, depression, addictions, failed relationships, not because we're cursed, but because we've built our lives on top of repressed truths. You see, most people think they suffer because of external circumstances, a breakup, a job loss, an illness, a betrayal. But these are only surface-level triggers. The real roots of suffering lie far deeper, in the structure of your psyche. And unless you go inward, unless you examine the foundations of your inner world, no amount of self-help tips or productivity hacks will bring peace. Let's begin with the concept Jung considered central to his work, the shadow. The shadow is everything within you that you've denied, repressed, ignored, or deemed unacceptable. It's not just your rage or jealousy, it's also your vulnerability, your sensitivity, your joy, your creative power, your intuitive wisdom. Everything you were told not to be or decided it was unsafe to be has been exiled into the unconscious. But here's the catch. The unconscious does not forget. What you repress becomes active in the dark. It festers, it takes on a life of its own. And because it's no longer in your awareness, it begins to influence your decisions, your emotions, your relationships from the shadows. Have you ever wondered why you keep dating the same kind of person, despite vowing never to do it again? Or why you sabotage things that are good for you? Or why, even when life seems objectively fine, you feel empty inside? These are not random patterns. They are echoes of what lies unresolved within you. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your suffering is not fate. It is not punishment. It is a signal, an invitation to look where you've never looked before. But most people ignore the invitation. Why? Because the journey inward is not glamorous. It's not quick. It demands courage, radical honesty, the willingness to feel what you've spent years avoiding. We live in a culture that worships positivity, productivity, and appearance. You're told to just think happy thoughts, be grateful, stay busy, and move on. But all of these are ways of avoiding depth. They are distractions from the real work, the inner excavation. Imagine your psyche as a house. Most people decorate the living room, the persona. That's the mask you show the world. You clean it, polish it, hang beautiful pictures. You make sure guests are impressed. But what about the basement? The basement is the unconscious. It's filled with boxes you haven't opened in years. Memories, traumas, forgotten dreams, buried anger, unmet needs. You avoid going down there because it's dark and you're afraid of what you might find. But here's the truth. The things you refuse to face are the very things running your life. Shadow work is the descent into that basement. It's not about judgment or blame. It's about integration. It's about reclaiming parts of yourself that you abandoned, sometimes decades ago. And in doing so, you begin to experience a strange kind of healing. Not the kind that makes everything easy, but the kind that makes you whole. Because suffering, in its purest form, is not just pain, it's fragmentation. It's the result of being torn between who you are and who you pretend to be, between your soul and your social conditioning, between your truth and your trauma. Think about it. How many times have you said yes when you meant no, smiled when you wanted to cry, stayed silent when your soul was screaming? Every one of those moments chips away at your integrity. Not moral integrity, but psychological integrity. The sense that your inner world and outer world are aligned. Jung taught that healing begins when we stop performing and start listening. Listening to the voice beneath the noise, the voice you've silenced, the one that says, "This isn't who I really am." But how do you hear that voice? Through dreams, through symbols, through emotional triggers, through breakdowns and synchronicities and strange coincidences that seem too meaningful to ignore. The unconscious is always speaking, but it does not speak in words. It speaks in images, in metaphors, in gut feelings, in recurring patterns. And when you ignore it, it becomes louder. It manifests as anxiety, as panic attacks, as chronic exhaustion, until eventually your life feels like a performance, and you don't know who you are beneath the mask. So ask yourself, what am I pretending not to feel? Are you pretending not to feel the loneliness in your relationship? Are you pretending not to notice how your job drains your soul? Are you pretending that the life you've built is truly yours? Or is it a collection of compromises? This is not about self-blame. This is about self-awareness. There's a difference. Jung believed that we all have an innate drive toward wholeness. He called this the individuation process, the lifelong journey of becoming who we truly are by integrating all aspects of the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the rational and the intuitive. But individuation doesn't happen by accident. It requires conscious effort, and most of all, it requires suffering, the kind of suffering that purifies, not destroys. Let's be honest, suffering is sacred, not because it feels good, but because it strips away illusion. It reveals what truly matters. It humbles the ego. It opens the heart. It reconnects you with something larger than yourself. You cannot become who you are without passing through the fire of who you are not. And yes, that fire burns. It burns away your defenses. It burns away your false identities. It burns away everything that is not aligned with your essence. But what remains after the fire is truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is the beginning of liberation. So if you are suffering now, don't rush to escape it. Don't numb it. Don't rationalize it. Sit with it. Ask it what it's trying to teach you, because behind every ache is a message. And behind every message is a map that leads not outward but inward. And maybe that's the greatest shift of all. Not trying to change the world to feel better, but changing the relationship you have with yourself. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Are you ready to wake up? You've heard the whisper, the quiet voice inside that says, "This isn't it." You try to silence it with routine, with responsibility, with whatever distractions modern life offers. But it always returns, late at night, in moments of stillness, or when everything you've worked for suddenly feels hollow. It's not that your life is terrible, it's that something feels missing, and you can't quite name it. Carl Jung understood this inner discomfort not as a flaw, but as a symptom of something profound, the conflict between the ego and the self. The ego is the I you think you are, the name, the role, the image you've carefully built and reinforced over years, the persona you wear to be accepted, successful, seen. But the self is deeper. It is the totality of who you truly are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, order and chaos. When the ego claims supremacy, suffering begins, because the ego wants safety, control, certainty. It wants to know who it is and be praised for it. But the self doesn't care about safety. The self wants truth, wholeness, expansion. And these two forces often pull in opposite directions. You may feel the pull when you're about to make a decision that looks smart, but feels dead inside, or when you follow expectations that crush your soul in the name of stability, or when you keep up an identity you've outgrown, just because you're afraid of letting people down. That's the inner war, and the longer it goes unacknowledged, the more intense the suffering becomes. Jung described neurosis not as an illness, but as the result of a failed dialogue between the ego and the self. When we ignore the voice of the unconscious, it doesn't vanish. It just finds other ways to speak. through compulsions, through emotional paralysis, through recurring life crises that seem to come out of nowhere. But they don't come from nowhere. They come from within. They come from the parts of you that you've disowned, your needs, your instincts, your dreams, your pain. And those parts are not content to stay buried forever. This is where complexes enter the picture. A complex is a cluster of thoughts, feelings, and memories that operate autonomously below the surface of awareness. For example, someone with an abandonment complex might interpret even neutral actions as signs of rejection. Or someone with a worthlessness complex might sabotage opportunities because they feel undeserving. These complexes form in childhood when the ego is still developing. A child who is neglected, shamed, or invalidated builds psychological armor to survive. But that armor becomes a prison. As adults, we continue living from those same scripts, reacting not to the present moment, but to old emotional wounds that were never processed. That's why suffering often feels irrational. You tell yourself, I should be happy, but something within you disagrees. You try to explain your behavior logically, but you keep repeating patterns you don't understand. You think you're making conscious choices, but your unconscious is pulling the strings. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that includes accepting your pain, not as a curse, but as a messenger. Pain tells the truth. It tells you where you're out of alignment, where you're pretending, where you've betrayed yourself in the name of fitting in. But instead of listening to pain, we label it as weakness. We medicate it, or worse, we spiritualize it, using abstract ideas to escape the raw discomfort of being human. You might say, everything happens for a reason, or I just need to stay positive. But beneath that, your inner child is screaming, why won't you listen to me? The path of healing begins the moment you stop running, the moment you sit with your fear, your rage, your guilt, not to indulge it, but to understand it, to bring it into the light of consciousness. Jung's process of individuation is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And to be whole, you must reclaim the parts of yourself that were lost along the way. That means confronting the shadow, not just your darkness, but your brilliance. Some people suffer not because they are afraid of failure, but because they are afraid of their own power, of what it would mean to truly live as themselves without apology. What would change if you stopped playing small? What would collapse if you stopped performing? What relationships would end if you no longer betrayed yourself to maintain them? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Because every time you abandon your inner truth to protect your outer image, you deepen the split. You feed the suffering, and eventually life will force you to face it, through breakdowns, through loss, through a crisis that strips you of everything false. And while that moment may feel like the end, it is often the beginning of real transformation. Jung believed that the self will orchestrate life circumstances to push the ego toward awakening. This is not cruelty, it is grace in disguise. The breakdown is not a failure. It is the psyche's attempt to restore balance. But you must participate in that process. You must ask, what am I avoiding? What pain am I not allowing myself to feel? What truth am I pretending not to know? The ego will resist. It will try to distract you, to pull you back into old patterns. It will whisper fears. You'll be alone. You'll fail. You'll be rejected. But the self has a quieter voice, one that says, keep going. There is more to you than this. To follow that voice is not easy. It means letting go of certainty. It means embracing ambiguity, solitude, and temporary chaos. It means grieving the life you thought you had to live. But in that grieving, there is also a rebirth. As you strip away what is not yours, what was inherited, projected, or socially imposed, you begin to discover what is yours. You uncover an inner authority, a deep sense of knowing that doesn't scream, but never wavers. And from that place, you begin to rebuild, not a new image, but a new relationship with yourself. This is the essence of individuation, to live not from egoic fear, but from soulful alignment, to integrate your darkness without being ruled by it, to accept the contradictions within you, not as flaws, but as sacred tension points. Because wholeness is not perfection, it's inclusion. It's being able to say, this is who I am, the broken and the beautiful, the fearful and the brave. Only then does suffering lose its grip, not because life becomes easy, but because you stop fighting yourself. And that changes everything. When you are no longer at war with yourself, the world softens. Your relationships deepen. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer chase love, you radiate it. You no longer seek validation, you embody presence. This is the shift Jung pointed toward, not a life free from pain, but a life rooted in truth. So if you're hurting, good. It means the unconscious is waking up. It means the ego can no longer silence the soul. It means the self is calling. Will you answer? You've come this far. You've faced the shadow. You've witnessed the ego's war against the self. You've begun to peel away the layers of illusion and false identity. Now, the question is no longer why you suffer. The question is, what will you do with the knowledge? Carl Jung didn't offer a prescription. He didn't believe in a universal formula for peace. What he offered was a path, a spiral, a descent into the depths, not to escape life, but to meet it more fully, to move beyond symptom management and into sacred transformation. He called this process not healing, but individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. But individuation isn't just a psychological process. It's alchemical. In ancient alchemy, the transformation of base metals into gold symbolized the inner transformation of the soul. The lead of unconsciousness, fragmentation, and repression must be dissolved, burned, and purified before the gold of the self can emerge. This is your task now, not to return to who you were, but to become who you were always meant to be. So, how does this transformation unfold? It begins with radical honesty. You must be willing to confront every illusion you've clung to, every story you've told yourself, every identity you've inherited. It's not enough to understand your suffering intellectually. You must embody your truth. Live it. Act from it, even when it's terrifying. Ask yourself, where in my life am I still pretending? What relationships demand a mask I no longer wish to wear? What would change if I let my soul lead? The answers will shake you. Because living from the self often means dismantling the very structures that once made you feel safe. Friendships will fade, careers will shift, values will evolve, and you'll grieve, not just people or places, but versions of yourself you've outgrown. But this grief is sacred. It clears the space for something real. As Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the essence of inner alchemy, to descend into what was rejected, to sit in the ashes of your former life, and to wait, not with impatience, but with presence, for something new to emerge. And it will. Not as fireworks, not as certainty, but as a quiet inner alignment. A sense that you're no longer fractured, that your words match your values, that your choices reflect your essence. You'll notice it in how you speak to yourself, in how you breathe through discomfort instead of escaping it, in how you respond to others from grounded clarity instead of wounded reaction. This is not perfection. It's not about becoming invulnerable or always calm. It's about becoming integrated. Integration means owning all of you, the fire and the softness, the logic and the mystery, the ambition and the stillness. You are not here to amputate parts of yourself to fit into some spiritual ideal. You are here to bring it all into harmony. And this harmony radiates. Others will feel it before you say a word, not because you're trying to impress them, but because truth has a frequency. It speaks through energy, posture, presence. The more you live in alignment, the more your outer world begins to reflect your inner world. This is where Jung's idea of synchronicity comes in. Meaningful coincidences that arise when you're on the path of authenticity. When your unconscious mind is no longer at war with your conscious intentions, life flows differently. You attract experiences that mirror your inner state. Doors open, clarity arrives. The right place, right time moments increase, not by magic, but by resonance. But to maintain this resonance, you must stay in relationship with your inner world. Jung emphasized the importance of symbolic life, working with dreams, active imagination, art, myth, and ritual. These are not escapist tools, they are the language of the unconscious. The deeper layers of your psyche do not respond to logic alone. They require symbol, image, mystery. So ask yourself, what do my dreams want me to see? What patterns keep showing up in my life? What archetypes am I embodying unconsciously? You are never alone in this process, even if it feels that way, because the self is always with you, quietly guiding, gently nudging, sometimes violently disrupting when you resist too long. This inner guidance doesn't speak in commands. It speaks in pull, in longing, in discomfort that won't go away. The path of transformation isn't about avoiding this discomfort. It's about leaning into it with reverence, asking, what are you trying to show me? Over time, something shifts. You begin to trust the process, not because it's easy, but because you've seen what happens when you ignore it. You know the cost of suppression. You've lived the consequences of abandoning yourself. You've felt the pain of chasing external validation while dying inside. And now, you choose differently, not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally listening to your soul, to your body, to the dream that keeps knocking even after all this time. This is where real power lives, not in control, but in surrender, not in dominance, but in alignment, not in forcing outcomes, but in embodying truth so fully that life begins to reshape itself around your presence. You no longer chase transformation. You are transformation. You no longer seek to escape suffering. You let suffering become your teacher, your mirror, your portal into deeper selfhood. Because suffering, in the end, was never the enemy. It was the doorway. The pain was the proof that something inside you refused to die, that your authenticity, no matter how buried, still had a pulse. So now, when suffering returns, and it will, you don't run. You greet it like an old companion. You say, I see you. What truth do you have for me today? This is the way of the alchemist, the way of the one who walks through fire and emerges not unscathed, but awakened. Carl Jung did not promise happiness. He offered meaning. He offered wholeness. He offered the courage to live a life of depth in a world addicted to the surface. So the question now is not, how can I stop suffering? The question is, am I willing to let suffering transform me? Because once you say yes to that question, you don't go back. You can't. You've tasted truth, and truth ruins everything that is false. It breaks the spell, it burns the masks, it ends the performance, and in that ending, a new beginning awaits. One you didn't have to earn or chase, one that was waiting for you all along. You just had to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget.